Who could have guessed that a boy born into slavery beneath the twin suns of a scorching desert would one day become the most feared figure in the galaxy, a man wrapped in obsidian armor, his breath echoing like a machine's whisper in the dark? Not even the Jedi, guardians of peace and wisdom, could see what was coming. And yet, every path begins with small footsteps. Tatooine, a world that didn't ask for dreams. The sand, always dry and whispering through the air, found its way into everything. In the settlements of Mos Espa, life was dusty, loud, and cruel. But even here, hope had a voice, small though it was. His name was Anakin Skywalker. He was just a boy, around 9 years old, with bright eyes and sun-kissed skin, hair tousled like a windstorm had brushed it aside. He was fast on his feet, and even faster with his words. He could fix droids, pod racers, and old fried circuitry that seasoned mechanics would give up on. No one taught him. He just knew. "I just feel things," he once said with a shrug, as if that explained everything. He and his mother, Shmi, lived in a small, windowless hovel owned by a Toydarian junk dealer named Watto. Life wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. Not when they were together. Anakin adored his mother. She was his calm in the chaos, her soft voice like cloth laid over a wound. They had little, but it was enough. Bread, water, laughter, the occasional dream. What he wanted most was freedom, and to fly. Not just in pod racers, which he secretly raced in the dangerous underground circuits, but really fly, through stars, past moons, into places people only imagined. "I'm going to be the first one to see them all," he'd say, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he could already see hyperspace tearing open before him. But destiny, like sand, has a way of slipping through your fingers even as you try to hold it still. It was a quiet day, though Tatooine never really had quiet days, when they walked in. A Jedi, a queen in the skies, and a curious Gungan with ears like sails. They entered Watto's shop looking for a hyperdrive. They left with something far more unexpected, a spark. Qui-Gon Jinn was different from the other Jedi. Stern, but not unkind. Wise, but not afraid to disobey the rules when the rules were wrong. He watched Anakin closely, not with suspicion, but with a strange reverence. The boy could sense it, the way Qui-Gon's gaze seemed to peer through time, beyond his flesh and into something deeper, something waiting to be discovered. "Your focus determines your reality," Qui-Gon told him softly, and Anakin held on to those words like a lifeline. There was a moment, small, barely a whisper of time, when everything tilted. The Jedi tested his blood. The midichlorian count was off the charts, higher than Master Yoda's. It was as if the Force itself had placed Anakin there, waiting to be found. "There was no father," his mother said. "Just a birth, miraculous, unexplained." The Jedi spoke of prophecy, of one who would bring balance to the Force, of someone called the Chosen One. But some of them, Obi-Wan especially, felt uncertain. "He's too old," they said, "too much fear." But Qui-Gon believed, perhaps too much. And then came the pod race. It wasn't just a sport. It was a gamble for freedom. If Anakin won, he'd be free. And not just free to walk out of Watto's shop, but free to follow the Jedi, to touch the stars he'd always dreamed of. The engines roared louder than thunder. The race was chaos. Spinning metal, screaming crowds, sandstorms like fists. But Anakin, small hands gripping the controls, didn't flinch. He flew like the desert knew him, like the Force guided his every motion. He won. There was cheering, laughter, a whirlwind of joy, but also heartbreak. He could go, but his mother could not. That night, when he packed what little he had, a toy he built himself, some parts, a goodbye he couldn't say out loud, he turned back for one last embrace. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. Shmi smiled, her hand warm against his cheek. "What does your heart tell you?" His heart didn't answer. Not yet. And so the boy walked into the stars, not as Anakin the slave, but as a Jedi to be, a ripple in the Force, a storm waiting to be named. Some say the moment his pod racer crossed the finish line was the moment the galaxy changed forever. Others believe the darkness had already begun long before, hiding beneath light like a shadow behind a flame. Historians still debate when exactly Anakin Skywalker began to fall. But maybe, just maybe, it was when he had to let go of his mother's hand. The stars above were endless, like pinpricks in a vast black sky, each one beckoning. But for Anakin, they no longer felt like promises. They felt like a test, one he wasn't sure he was ready for. The ship hummed beneath his feet, a low, almost comforting sound. He sat in a small cabin, eyes fixed on the vast expanse outside, his thoughts far away. A part of him wanted to reach out and touch the stars, truly reach them. But another part, a darker part, feared what he might find there. He had left behind the dust of Tatooine, but the ache of leaving his mother still gnawed at him. She had been everything, and now she was just a memory. She had whispered to him as the ship lifted into the sky, her words a fading echo in his ears. "Follow your dreams, my son." But where exactly were his dreams leading him? The Jedi Temple on Coruscant felt like another world entirely. Tall spires of stone, glimmering with the weight of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, incense, and something else, something intangible. Power, peace, an odd serenity that only someone who had truly mastered their place in the universe could radiate. Qui-Gon Jinn had led Anakin there, watching him closely, as if unsure whether to push him into the deep end or let him find his way. Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Jedi Knight with a kind heart but a rigid mind, seemed to harbor doubts. He watched Anakin as one might watch a flickering candle in a storm, fascinated by its potential but uncertain whether it would burn out before it had a chance to shine. The Council was wary. Anakin could feel their eyes on him, cold and calculating. They were measuring him, testing him, and every glance they shared with one another spoke volumes. "Too old," they murmured. "Too much fear." But Qui-Gon was unwavering. He believed in Anakin. He believed in the prophecy. The others might have seen a child too eager, too desperate for something beyond his grasp. But Qui-Gon saw something else, something more. The training was rigorous, but Anakin was determined. His speed was like a force of nature. He excelled in everything the Jedi tried to teach him. He mastered lightsaber combat faster than anyone expected, his reflexes honed like a razor's edge. But more than anything, it was his connection to the Force that was unlike any Jedi they had ever seen. It was raw, untamed, and incredibly powerful, too powerful. But it wasn't just the Force that troubled them. It was the way he used it. He could feel everything, every ripple, every whisper of energy, whether it came from a person, a planet, or the stars themselves. He could sense pain and fear, joy and love, all as though they were part of him. It was exhilarating, but also terrifying. And as time went on, it became clear that his attachment to the people around him was growing stronger. The Jedi, after all, had a code: no attachments. Anakin's heart, however, was already inextricably tied to others, and it was a connection that would soon threaten everything. Padme Amidala, the queen-turned-senator from Naboo, was an enigma to him. She was strong, wise, and far older than him, but there was something about her that felt familiar. She reminded him of the light that had once lived in his mother. There was a bond between them, one that he couldn't explain, yet felt deep within. The first time they met again, after years of separation, it wasn't in the way Anakin had imagined. They were both different, older, changed by the galaxy's tumultuous tides. But when their eyes met, there was a flicker, a spark. He had grown into a young man, tall and strong, his face a little more lined with the burden of the war. And she had become a symbol of hope, a beacon amidst the galaxy's darkening skies. But the warmth that grew between them was undeniable. She was the first person to see him, truly see him, not as a Jedi in training, not as the chosen one, but as Anakin, a boy with a heart full of dreams and a deep, aching longing for something he could never quite hold on to. As they spent more time together, the walls between them began to crumble. Their bond deepened, an undeniable connection. But with every passing moment, the darkness that loomed at the edge of Anakin's heart grew stronger. The fear that haunted him, the fear of losing someone he loved, was there, lurking beneath the surface. The same fear that had driven him to save Padme in his dreams. "I'm afraid," he whispered to her one night, his voice barely more than a breath. "Afraid of losing you." Padme didn't answer immediately, her expression softening with the weight of his words. She knew, she understood, but she also knew the danger of what this fear could lead to. "You won't lose me, Anakin," she said gently. But there was an unspoken truth hanging between them. The darkness within him was growing. She could feel it too, and the more they tried to resist it, the more it seemed to pull them under. And so the Jedi's promise, no attachments, was tested. Tested in a way that would change the course of everything. Anakin's heart was no longer solely his to command. It was already tied to someone else. And as his bond with Padme deepened, so too did his struggle with the darkness that clung to him. It whispered to him in moments of doubt, promising power, promising control, promising the one thing that terrified him most, the power to save those he loved. But every power has a price, and the price of attachment, Anakin would learn too late, was more than he could ever have imagined. The weight of the galaxy seemed heavier than ever. Anakin's thoughts grew restless, like a storm gathering on the horizon, threatening to consume him. His time as a Jedi was slipping away, piece by piece, replaced by a nagging fear that would not let go. The war raged on, and with every battle won, he could feel the darkness closing in, like a shadow in the corner of his mind. The Jedi, once the guiding lights of the galaxy, seemed to grow distant with each passing day. They no longer spoke of peace, but of strategy, of victories, of what must be sacrificed. It wasn't just the war that was changing the galaxy, it was the people in it. Anakin had learned to trust in the Force, but the more he saw of the galaxy, the more it felt as though the Force itself was splintering. The ideals he had once held. But there was something else now, a quiet whisper that had begun to echo in his heart, growing louder with each moment. His fear of loss, of failure, was consuming him. He had seen Padme's death in his dreams over and over again. She was slipping through his fingers, and no matter how fast, the war had stolen so much already, and now it threatened to take her too. His mother was gone, and he couldn't save her. The Jedi had failed him then, and now he feared he would fail Padme. It was during these dark times that Palpatine, the Supreme Chancellor, began to offer something Anakin could not ignore. His words were soft, like the caress of a summer breeze, but they were laced with a promise of power. Power that could stop Padme's death, power that could give Anakin control over the... Palpatine never spoke of the dark side outright. He didn't have to. His words were more subtle than that. He knew Anakin's heart better than anyone, knew the pain of love and loss that tugged at him. He spoke of strength, of saving those who mattered most, of controlling fate. He spoke of doing wrathwithe, of shaping. Anakin, caught between his duty as a Jedi and his fear of loss, felt a deep unease begin to settle in his chest. The Jedi had warned him of the dangers of attachment, but the more he fought against it, the more it seemed like something he couldn't escape. Love was not just a fleeting emotion, it was part of him. And if the Jedi couldn't protect it, if they couldn't understand it, then maybe they were wrong about everything. He had spent years fighting for what was right, for what he believed in. But the war had shown him that there was no simple answer, no easy path. The lines between good and evil, light and dark, had blurred. And in that murky gray, Anakin felt lost. He wanted to save Padme. That was all that mattered now. Nothing else seemed to hold the same weight. The fear of losing her gnawed at him like a constant ache in his chest. He could see it now, clearer than ever. The only way to protect her, to truly save her, was to take control. Palpatine was right. Power was the key. The dark side wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. Anakin had always been different, had always felt more connected to the Force than anyone else. Perhaps it was time to stop resisting it.
The Jedi Council, with their cold and detached approach, had their own plans. They had never trusted him fully. They had never believed in his strength, his potential. They didn't understand his struggle. But Palpatine understood. He promised Anakin the one thing he craved more than anything: control, the ability to shape his own destiny, the ability to save Padme. Anakin knew, deep down, that the decision he was about to make would change everything. There was no turning back. He had spent his life trying to be the hero, trying to live up to the expectations of the Jedi and the galaxy. But now it was different. Now he would be the one to decide. The pull of the dark side was strong. Every moment of doubt, every whisper of fear only made it stronger. It wasn't just a temptation anymore. It was a need, a desperate need to control the one thing that mattered most to him. In the end, Anakin chose to embrace that power. He could feel the shift within him, a deepening of his connection to the Force that was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was like stepping into a storm, feeling the energy swirl around him, electrifying his every thought. Padme, the one person who anchored him, was in danger. The visions were becoming clearer, and with each passing day, the certainty of her fate weighed heavier on him. He would not let her go, not like he had with his mother. He would save her, no matter the cost. The Jedi had their rules, their way of thinking, their code. But Anakin knew now that he couldn't follow their path. His heart, his soul, had already veered from it. He could see the path laid out before him, the path to ultimate power, to saving Padme, and to no longer being controlled by the fate of the galaxy. And so the decision was made. The first step had been taken. Anakin Skywalker was no more. From the ashes of the boy who had once dreamed of freedom, Darth Vader rose. The galaxy would know him by a new name, a name that would strike fear into every corner of the universe. But Anakin had made his choice. And in the quiet of his heart, he believed it was the only choice left.
The transition was subtle at first, a shift inside him that he could not easily explain, like a change in the wind's direction, something that had always been there, but now felt more tangible, more powerful.
Anakin sat alone in the dim light of his quarters, the soft hum of the temple around him almost soothing. But the quiet only made the weight of his decision heavier. The stars outside his window were cold, distant, so much like the path that now stretched out before him. The Jedi had always taught him to listen to the Force, to let it guide him. But now he felt something different. The Force felt more like a tool, an instrument of power, something he could control, shape to his will. For so long it had been a source of peace, but now it felt like an unrelenting fire, burning through his every thought, his every action. He tried to push the thoughts away. He tried to focus on his duty as a Jedi Knight, to honor the ideals that had brought him to this point. But the truth kept pulling at him. What he had just done, the path he had chosen, could not be undone. Padmé was still on his mind, always on his mind. The thought of her safety, her life, held him captive like a prisoner. He had seen her die in his dreams, over and over. The vision was never clear, always fading before he could understand what it meant, but the feeling of loss was always the same. It gripped him with a force that felt too real, too heavy. He could feel it, the inevitable end. His heart ached at the thought of it. No matter how much he tried to dismiss the vision, no matter how many times he told himself it was just a dream, the fear gnawed at him. And now Palpatine's words echoed in his mind. The dark side held the power to stop death, to control fate. Wasn't that what he needed? Wasn't it what Padmé needed? Anakin closed his eyes and let his thoughts wander back to the Council. The Council who had doubted him, who had failed to see him for who he truly was, who had treated him like a child, a tool, not someone capable of making the decisions that would shape the galaxy. They had not trusted him. They had failed to understand the depth of his potential. He had given everything for the Jedi, everything, and yet they did not believe in him.
The Jedi believed in rules, in detachment, in never allowing their emotions to cloud their judgment. They believed that by suppressing their feelings, they could remain pure, untainted. But Anakin had learned a bitter truth. Emotions were not something to be feared. They were part of what made him who he was. Love, fear, anger, hope, they were all part of the same spectrum. And it was through these emotions that he could change the galaxy. The Jedi had been wrong. The Jedi had been blinded by their code. They could not see the bigger picture. The dark side offered clarity. It was strong, it was powerful, it was true. And, most importantly, it was something that could save Padmé. He could not let her slip away like everything else in his life had slipped away. He could not. With each passing day, the Jedi's teachings seemed to fade further into the distance, and in their place, the allure of the dark side grew. Its promises whispered like a lullaby in his mind. It felt so right, so necessary. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. The galaxy would not understand what he was doing. The Jedi would never accept him. But Padmé would understand. Padmé would be safe. That was all that mattered now. And as he sat there, alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars, Anakin made a silent vow to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect her, whatever it took. The galaxy might never forgive him, but if he could save the one person who mattered most, then maybe, just maybe, he could find peace. He stood up, pacing across the small room. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, but there was no turning back now. His choice had been made. He had already taken the first step. The Jedi would not stop him. No one could.
He was no longer the boy who had dreamed of flying across the stars. He was no longer Anakin Skywalker. He had become something else, something more. He was Lord Vader now, and the galaxy would never be the same again.
The dark side was a strange, intoxicating thing. It did not scream or shout. It whispered, soft and persistent, like the steady drip of water wearing down stone. Anakin could feel it wrapping itself around him, seeping into his every thought, his every decision. At times, he could barely tell where the Force ended and his own desires began. It was becoming harder to separate the two. He had made the choice. There was no turning back. And now, all he could do was move forward, deeper into the shadows that were calling to him. The Jedi had always taught him that the darkness was something to be feared, that it corrupted and consumed. But in the hours after he swore his allegiance to the dark side, Anakin began to see things differently. The power it promised felt like an extension of himself, not a foreign entity, as the Jedi had described. It was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. It was a part of him. Anakin walked the halls of the Jedi Temple, his footsteps echoing off the cold stone floors. It was a place he had once felt at home, a place where he had spent his childhood training to become a Jedi Knight. But now the temple felt alien to him. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the weight of the past. He could feel the eyes of the Jedi on him, even though they said nothing. Their judgment was palpable. He was no longer one of them. The shift was small at first. He had always been something of an outsider, a child of prophecy, a warrior with a power far beyond his peers. But now there was no doubt in his mind. He had surpassed them. He could feel it in the way the Force responded to him. It was like the energy around him bent to his will, no longer just a tool to be wielded for good, but something darker, stronger, more personal. And yet, with every step away from the Jedi, the emptiness inside him only grew. The Jedi had always said that emotions were dangerous. They taught him to suppress them, to rid themselves of attachment. But now, Anakin realized that the more he tried to control his feelings, the more they consumed him. He had tried to suppress his love for Padme, his anger at the war, his fear of loss. But the more he pushed those feelings down, the stronger they fought back. They were part of him, woven into his very being. And now, they were his power. The more he embraced the dark side, the clearer his visions of Padme became. He could see her, always on the edge of death, always slipping further away. The vision never changed. It always ended the same way. But the dark side gave him hope. It gave him the promise of control. If he could only harness enough of the Force, enough power, he could save her. He could protect her from the fate he had seen. But he knew the cost. The Jedi had warned him about the dark side's price. It would consume him, they said. It would twist his mind and destroy his soul. And yet, Anakin felt none of that. He didn't feel consumed. He felt stronger, more certain, more alive. He spent hours, days, weeks in seclusion, focusing on his training. Palpatine's voice was always in his mind, encouraging him to embrace the darkness fully. "Let go of your attachments, your fear, your doubts," the Chancellor said. "Only then will you be able to save her. Only then will you be able to change the galaxy." And so he let go. He let go of the Jedi, of the Republic, of everything he had once believed in. His heart ached for Padme, but he knew this was the only way to keep her safe, the only way to protect the ones he loved. One evening, as the stars flickered beyond the windows of his quarters, Anakin sat alone, his hands resting on his lap. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness he felt the Force swell around him. He reached out, seeking the power that had been promised to him. He could feel it now. The dark side answered his call, wrapping itself around him, filling him with a power so immense that it took his breath away. His body tingled with energy. His mind raced with possibilities. This was it. This was the power he needed to save her, to save everyone. But in the back of his mind, a faint whisper lingered, a voice that seemed to call from a place far away. It was Obi-Wan's voice. "Anakin, what are you doing?" But Anakin pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford to listen to those doubts, not now, not when he was so close. He had already made his choice. He had already stepped into the darkness, and there was no going back. The vision of Padme standing at the edge of a vast abyss reached him again. He could see it so clearly now. He could almost touch it. He reached out, his hands trembling. He could feel her. He could feel her life slipping away, slipping through his fingers. Anakin's breath quickened, and for a moment his mind was consumed with rage. But it was different now. The rage didn't burn him like it used to. Now it fueled him. It gave him strength. With a scream, he summoned every ounce of power he could muster, pouring all his anger, all his fear, all his love for Padme into the Force. It swelled, twisting and turning, building like a storm that could not be contained. The power surged through him, overwhelming, consuming. And as it did, Anakin knew that this was only the beginning. He had embraced the darkness, and with it, he would change everything. Anakin's heart thundered in his chest, his mind a whirlwind of emotions as the power surged through him. It felt like an awakening, like a fire that had long been smoldering, now roaring to life with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Every muscle in his body felt alive, charged with energy, every thought sharpened by the dark side. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. He was no longer just a Jedi. He was something more. In the midst of this overwhelming wave of power, Anakin's thoughts drifted back to Padme. Her face was always there, floating in the back of his mind, the anchor to his every action, every breath. The vision of her death had become his obsession, and the dark side seemed to promise a way to rewrite it. He had never truly understood the Jedi's teachings about the Force before, about its balance and harmony. Now it all seemed so naive. The Jedi had spoken of the light side as a path of peace and self-control, but Anakin had learned that peace was a lie. The universe was chaos, filled with war and pain. And in this chaos, the dark side was the only force that could provide him with the strength to reshape reality. In the quiet of his quarters, the room heavy with the aftermath of his internal storm, Anakin opened his eyes. His hands still trembled, but the power he had unleashed was like a distant echo now, fading into the corners of his mind, settling into the core of his being. But there was no time to revel in it, not now. Not when Padme's fate was still hanging by a thread. He stood from where he had been sitting, his legs steady beneath him as the dark energy that filled the room slowly dissipated. His eyes focused on the window, staring at the stars, but they no longer felt so far away. Everything in his life had led him to this moment. This was his destiny, the path that he had always been meant to walk. And yet, a gnawing emptiness remained just beneath the surface. It wasn't a feeling he could easily shake off, but it was something he had learned to push aside, to bury beneath the weight of his new power. He couldn't afford to be weak, to feel the burden of doubt, not when there was so much at stake. As he walked to the door, preparing to meet with Palpatine, a voice in the back of his mind called out to him again, this time more clearly than before. "Anakin, are you truly sure of this?" It was Obi-Wan's voice, the one that had once been a source of guidance, a voice of reason in the chaos. Anakin felt his chest tighten as the familiar memories rushed to the forefront of his mind. Obi-Wan had been his mentor, his friend. He had trusted him, relied on him. And yet, the more he thought about the Jedi, the more he saw their hypocrisy, their inability to understand what was truly at stake. The Jedi had never understood his pain, his fear. They had only ever pushed him to suppress it, to ignore it. But it was his pain that gave him strength, his fear that gave him purpose. Without those emotions, he was nothing. Without the dark side, he was powerless. "I can't let her die," he whispered to himself, more to silence the voice in his head than anything else. He could hear Palpatine's teachings ringing in his ears. The dark side offered the strength to defy fate, to shape the future. The Jedi had spoken of destiny, but it was the dark side that gave him the power to break free of it. He could feel it now, the weight of the decision pressing on him, like a storm gathering in the distance, just on the edge of the horizon. The galaxy would never forgive him for what he was about to do. The Jedi would never forgive him. But Padme would be saved.
That thought was the only thing that kept him moving forward, his resolve hardening with every step he took. The path was set. Anakin opened the door to his quarters, his mind focused. He had come too far to turn back now. He had sacrificed too much. The galaxy would change, but it would be for the better, for Padme, for the future. And anyone who stood in his way would be swept aside. As he walked down the corridor toward his meeting with Palpatine, a feeling of clarity settled over him. The Jedi had their rules, their codes, their ideals, but the time for those had passed. The galaxy was in chaos, and only someone with true power could bring order to it. Only someone like him. Padme was waiting. She had to be saved. And as Anakin reached the door to Palpatine's private chambers, he paused. His hand hovered over the door, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. There was no going back. He took a deep breath, feeling the dark side coil within him like a serpent, ready to strike. And then, with steady hands, he opened the door. Palpatine was waiting. The Chancellor's smile was knowing, as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Ah, Anakin," Palpatine said softly, his voice as smooth as silk. "I knew you would come. I've been expecting you." Anakin stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind him. This was it, the moment that would shape everything. He was no longer a Jedi. He was Lord Vader. And together, with Palpatine, they would change the galaxy. The darkness in the room seemed to deepen as Anakin stepped forward, his cloak swishing behind him. The soft hum of the lightsaber hilts on his belt provided a faint background to the palpable tension in the air. Palpatine's office was dimly lit, the shadows cast across the walls, making it feel both intimate and dangerous. The flickering light from the nearby desk lamp illuminated the cold, calculating smile on the Chancellor's face as he motioned for Anakin to sit. "You've made the right choice, Anakin," Palpatine said, his voice dripping with a subtle, almost fatherly warmth. "The Jedi, they do not understand. They never did." Anakin's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he did not sit. He could feel the weight of Palpatine's words pressing down on him, mingling with the shadows that had taken root in his mind. The vision of Padme, her lifeless form, flashed once again before his eyes. It was a pain that no Jedi could have understood. He knew now that no matter how much they had trained him, no matter how skilled he was with a lightsaber, they had never taught him how to save the ones he loved. Only the dark side had that answer.
I'm ready. Anakin's voice was steady, his mind made up. He wasn't a boy anymore, torn between two worlds. He was beyond that. Palpatine's smile grew wider, more pleased, as if he had already seen the conclusion of the journey that Anakin was still walking. Yes, of course you are. You have always been destined for greatness. The Force is strong with you, stronger than any Jedi who's ever lived. And together we will reshape the galaxy, bend it to our will. Anakin's eyes flickered toward the Chancellor's desk, where the flickering light cast shadows over a series of ancient-looking documents, papers that seemed to tell stories of power, of secrets. Palpatine had been planning this for a long time, he realized. The Sith had been patient. They had been patient for years, waiting for the right moment. And now they had him. He was their instrument. You know what must be done, Palpatine continued, his voice low, almost hypnotic. The Jedi will not stand by and watch as we usher in a new era. They will fight, and when they do, we must strike. Anakin nodded, his mind already far beyond the conversation. He could see it all now, the betrayal, the purge, the Jedi so steadfast in their belief that they alone held the key to peace would be no more. He could almost hear the snap hiss of the lightsabers as they ignited, the cries of the Jedi as they fell one by one. It would be the dawn of a new order. It would be his order. I will do whatever is necessary, Anakin said quietly, his voice filled with an unshakable conviction. There was no more hesitation, no more doubt. He was resolute. Palpatine's gaze softened for a brief moment, a fleeting glimpse of something resembling approval. Good. The time has come, Anakin. The galaxy will change, and you will be at the heart of it. But remember, once you've crossed this line, there's no returning. There's no turning back. Anakin's chest tightened at the thought, but he didn't flinch. No, he couldn't. The cost of turning back now was too great. Padmé's life was more important than anything else, more important than any vow he had ever taken. He could not live with the thought of losing her, especially not when he had the power to save her. I understand, Anakin said, and for the first time in a long while, the words felt like a promise. Palpatine leaned forward, his smile widening. Then it is time for you to take your place, Lord Vader. The galaxy awaits. Anakin's breath caught in his throat. The words reverberated in his mind, stirring something deep inside him. Lord Vader. The name felt foreign, yet so right. It was the name of someone powerful, someone who would not be controlled, someone who would change the galaxy. And with that thought, the final walls of Anakin Skywalker's identity began to crumble. The boy who had once dreamed of freedom, the Jedi who had fought for peace, was no more. In his place stood something darker, something stronger. Anakin Skywalker had died, and Lord Vader was born. Palpatine rose from his seat slowly, his figure imposing, his hands clasped behind his back. The Jedi will be dealt with swiftly. But first, there is someone you must speak to. Someone who will make the final decision on how we proceed. Anakin raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Who? Palpatine turned to face him fully, his eyes gleaming with a secretive intensity.
Your former master, Obi-Wan Kenobi." The name hit Anakin like a punch to the gut, but he swallowed the surge of anger that bubbled up. Obi-Wan, his mentor, his friend, the man who had trained him to be a Jedi, the man who still thought he was good. The thought of confronting Obi-Wan was unbearable, but it was a necessary step. The Jedi were no longer his allies. He had chosen his path. He had already betrayed them in his heart. Now it was time to make that betrayal final. "I will not hesitate," Anakin said, his voice low but resolute. Palpatine's eyes twinkled. "No, you won't. Go, my young apprentice. The time has come." Anakin took one last look at the flickering light on the desk, the shadows that filled the room, and then he turned on his heel, walking toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, the weight of what was about to happen settled on him like a shroud. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, but he pushed through it. This was his destiny, and there was no turning back. The galaxy would never be the same again. As he walked down the long corridor toward his destiny, the sound of his footsteps was steady, deliberate. There was no fear in him now. There was only purpose, only power. And ahead of him, waiting, was the man who would make him complete. Obi-Wan Kenobi. The hallway stretched endlessly before Anakin, the soft hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath his feet. His steps were heavy, each one echoing in the otherwise silent corridor. The weight of his decisions settled into his bones, but with each breath he pushed the doubt further away. The dark side was like a constant companion now, whispering in his ear, guiding him, urging him to move forward, to embrace what he had become. The door ahead slid open with a soft hiss, and Anakin stepped into the dimly lit chamber. The room was small, but it was enough for the task at hand. In the center, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood, his eyes narrowing as he saw Anakin approach. The Jedi Knight's face was a mask of calm, but there was something there, something that flickered just beneath the surface. He had known this day would come. "You came," Obi-Wan said, his voice measured, but there was a sadness in it, as though he already knew what Anakin had become. Anakin stopped a few paces away, his hand hovering near the hilt of his lightsaber, but he didn't draw it, not yet, not until it was time. "I had to," Anakin replied, his voice strained with something between regret and resolve. "There's no other way." Obi-Wan's expression hardened, his eyes darkening with the weight of Anakin's words. "I hoped you would not see it this way," he said softly, almost a whisper. "I hoped you could find peace, Anakin, that you could still come back." Anakin's breath quickened, the familiar pang of emotion stirring in his chest. But he pushed it down, letting the anger rise instead. The anger that had fueled him, had brought him to this point. The anger that had been growing in him for years, ever since the Council had denied him the rank of Jedi Master. The anger that had kept him awake at night, wondering why they couldn't see what he could see. "You don't understand, Obi-Wan," Anakin said, his voice rising. "The Jedi are holding us back. They've never seen the truth. They've never seen how much power we can have, how much we can control. They would rather let the galaxy burn than let us use the Force for something greater." Obi-Wan's eyes softened for a moment, and he took a slow step forward. "Anakin, the dark side doesn't give you control," he said quietly. "It enslaves you. You're not meant to rule, not like this. You have the potential for so much good. Please, come back. Join us. Help us save the Republic." But Anakin could feel the shift inside him. His heart clenched painfully at the thought, but the pain was nothing compared to the burning need to protect Padme, to save her from the nightmare he had seen. The vision of her death still lingered, an ever-present shadow.
"You don't get it." Anakin's voice was cold now, like the edge of a blade. I'm not the one who's wrong. I'm doing this to save the ones I love, to protect Padmé. She is the only thing that matters now. Everything I've done for her." The words hit Obi-Wan like a punch to the gut. The pain was visible on his face, his eyes clouded with disbelief. "Padmé," he whispered, almost to himself. "You've lost yourself, Anakin. The woman you love, the life you want to protect, none of it will survive if you continue down this path. You're turning your back on everything you've ever stood for, everything you fought for." Anakin's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, his eyes burning with emotion. "I'm not the one who's lost. You can't see it. You can't see that we're better than they are. The Jedi don't have the answers, Obi-Wan. They never did. They're too afraid of what's possible. They want to keep us in the dark. I'm going to bring light to the galaxy. I'm going to bring order." Obi-Wan took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a brief moment, as though praying for strength. When he opened them again, there was no trace of doubt left in his gaze. Only sorrow. "I will stop you, Anakin," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "If I have to, I'll fight you. I won't let you fall any further into this. You're my brother. I love you, Anakin, but I will stop you." Anakin's heart twisted at those words. Brother. He remembered the first days of his training with Obi-Wan, the way they had fought side by side, learned together, laughed together. Obi-Wan had been the only true family he had known, even more than the Jedi Order. And now he was the last barrier between him and the power he sought. The tension in the room thickened, crackling with the weight of their unspoken conflict. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time itself had frozen, holding its breath in anticipation of the inevitable. Then, with a sudden motion, Anakin drew his lightsaber. The blue blade hissed to life in his hand, casting a cold glow across his face. Obi-Wan didn't hesitate. His own lightsaber was in his hand almost instantly, the green blade coming to life with a familiar hum. "Anakin," Obi-Wan said, his voice pained. "Please." "I'm sorry, Obi-Wan," Anakin said, his voice a low whisper, barely audible over the crackle of their blades. "But this is the way it has to be." The first clash of their lightsabers rang through the small room, a bright spark of energy as their blades met in a violent burst of light. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through Anakin's body, but it only fueled him. He was stronger now, faster, more skilled than ever before. He could feel the dark side flowing through him, pushing him forward. Obi-Wan, despite his experience, struggled to keep up. Their blades met again and again, a series of rapid strikes that lit up the room. Anakin was relentless, each blow filled with raw power, fueled by the rage that had taken hold of him. He was no longer fighting for justice, for peace. He was fighting to win, to claim what was rightfully his. The anger surged in him, making him faster, stronger, more dangerous with every passing moment. Obi-Wan was no slouch either. He moved with the grace and precision of a master, his blade dancing in expert arcs, parrying and countering Anakin's every strike. But there was something different now. Anakin's attacks were vicious, more chaotic. He fought with a desperation that Obi-Wan had never seen in him before. "You're fighting for the wrong cause," Obi-Wan said, his voice strained as he parried another blow. "You're not a Sith, Anakin. You're not a killer. This isn't you." Anakin growled, his lightsaber coming down with a powerful strike that sent Obi-Wan stumbling back. "You don't get it. You never understood what I had to do. This is my choice, and I will make it stick." With one last powerful strike, Anakin knocked Obi-Wan's saber out of his hands.
The green blade clattered to the floor, leaving Obi-Wan unarmed and vulnerable. Anakin's breathing was heavy now, his eyes filled with anger and pain. But as he stood over Obi-Wan, ready to strike, something inside him hesitated. The part of him that had once been a Jedi, the part that had loved his master like a brother. But it was gone now. There was nothing left. Anakin raised his lightsaber, ready to end it. And then, with one final, desperate cry, Obi-Wan whispered, "I love you, Anakin." In that moment, the weight of it all crashed down on Anakin. But it wasn't enough to stop him. He struck. The room was silent. The sound of the lightsaber's hum faded, leaving only the soft, ragged breaths of both men in the stillness. Anakin stood over Obi-Wan, his blade still crackling with energy, the tips of his fingers trembling as he slowly withdrew the weapon. The green glow of Obi-Wan's lightsaber lay cold on the floor, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow deeper, heavier. Anakin's chest heaved with exertion, but something inside him, something buried deep, began to stir. Obi-Wan had fallen. He had struck his former master down, the man who had once believed in him, the man who had guided him. But now it was too late. It had to be. He had to embrace the power, the darkness, the certainty of his new path. He couldn't go back. The galaxy was too broken. He had to fix it. He had to rule it. Yet, standing there, over Obi-Wan's defeated form, a small, uncomfortable doubt began to gnaw at the edges of Anakin's mind. He didn't have time for this. He couldn't afford to stop now. He had chosen this. He had chosen power, control. He had chosen Padme. The vision of her death once again flashed in his mind. He could see her, surrounded by shadows, her hands reaching for him as she fell into the abyss. He had promised to save her, promised to protect her from the nightmare that haunted him. The dark side was the only way to save her. The Jedi had failed, and Obi-Wan had betrayed him by standing in his way. But as he stood there, staring down at his fallen master, a deep ache settled in his heart. Obi-Wan's words had been true. "You're not a Sith. You're not a killer." Anakin's gaze flickered toward Obi-Wan's body. He had crossed a line now, one he could never uncross. He had severed the last thread that had held him to the person he had once been. There was no going back. Anakin's breath shuddered. The darkness was here, inside him, consuming him. It was too much to bear. But his resolve was firm. He couldn't stop. Not now. He turned away from Obi-Wan, his cloak swirling behind him as he moved toward the door. He could feel the weight of what he had done settling on him like a heavy chain that would never break. But there was no time to dwell on the past. As the door slid open, he was met by the cold, calculating gaze of Palpatine, standing in the hallway, waiting for him. The older man's expression softened with approval, his smile faint but full of satisfaction. "You've done well, Lord Vader," Palpatine said, his voice like silk, soothing and dangerous all at once. "The galaxy is yours now."
Anakin didn't respond immediately. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and rage. But the image of Padme, her smiling face, her laughter, pushed all else aside. "I did what I had to do," Anakin finally said, his voice cold, almost robotic. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Palpatine or himself. Palpatine stepped forward, placing a hand on Anakin's shoulder with a firm, reassuring grip. "Yes, you did, and now the galaxy will bend to your will. You have the power, the strength to create the future you want.
Together, we will shape the fate of every living being. The Jedi are gone. The Republic is ours to command." Anakin nodded, feeling the truth of those words sink in. But there was something else, a lingering doubt, a cold shiver in his chest. The dark side promised him control, promised him power, promised him the one thing he longed for more than anything, to save Padme. But was this really the way? Was it worth the price he had paid? He glanced back at the room where Obi-Wan lay. The vision of his fallen master, his last words echoed in Anakin's mind. "I love you, Anakin." But no, there was no turning back. Not now. The galaxy would burn, but it would be remade in his image, a place where he could protect the ones he loved. He turned away, locking the doubt in the darkest corner of his mind. "I'm ready," he said, his voice now steady. Palpatine smiled widely, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "Then let's begin." The sound of the distant alarm bells rang through the corridors of the newly established Imperial capital. Anakin felt a strange sense of pride fill him as he marched forward, the black armor of his new identity now fully donned, its cold metallic surface reflecting the dim lights above. Lord Vader, the name that had once felt so foreign, now fit him like a second skin. It was no longer a name he wore reluctantly. It was who he had become. The Empire was rising, and it would not fall. Palpatine had already begun laying the foundations for the new order, the new rules. The Jedi were scattered, hunted, but that didn't matter now. Their time was over. The time of the Sith had come. The time of Vader had come. He could feel the pulse of the Force flowing through him, like fire in his veins. He was more powerful than he had ever been, and it felt intoxicating. But that was the price, wasn't it? Power always came with a price, and that price was paid with blood. Anakin's heart still ached for Padme, still feared the future he had seen for her. But now he had the tools to change it. He would not fail her. He would do whatever it took. He had already done the impossible. "Lord Vader," a voice interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see one of the Emperor's aides, his posture rigid with respect. "The fleet is ready. The next phase is about to begin." Anakin gave a single sharp nod. "Then let's proceed." As he followed the aide down the gleaming hallways of the Imperial ship, his thoughts turned once more to the galaxy that awaited him. It was his to command. The future was his to shape. And nothing, no one, would stand in his way. Later, as Anakin stood at the bridge of the Imperial flagship, overlooking the stars and the galaxy that lay beneath him, he felt a sense of finality. The decision had been made. His heart was no longer torn. The Jedi were gone. The Republic was no more. In their place, the Empire would rise. And at its heart stood him, Lord Vader. The stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent as Anakin stared out of the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back. The Imperial fleet had already begun to mobilize, and as he looked out over the vast expanse of space, a flicker of something buried deep within him, stirred. There was a momentary flash of regret, something soft and familiar that whispered from the depths of his soul. The man he had once been, the man who had fought for justice, for freedom, for the Republic, was gone. But the future, the galaxy, it was his now. He had made his choice. The Empire was rising from the ashes of the Republic, just as he had been taught to believe it would. The darkness felt natural, a part of him. Every moment of power, every act of defiance against the Jedi Order, every choice he had made led him here. And for a brief moment, as the tension of his last encounter with Obi-Wan still hung in the air, Vader, felt the weight of it all. "Lord Vader," a voice broke through the stillness, soft but urgent. He turned to find a young officer standing at the doorway, his posture rigid, hands clasped in front of him. His eyes were nervous, but he stood with the full respect due to his superior. "What is it?" Anakin's voice was low, colder than he intended, but it didn't matter. His mind was already far from the officer's presence. "The Emperor requests your presence in the command center, sir. It's about the next phase of our strategy," the officer said, his voice quivering slightly. Anakin nodded. The Emperor, Palpatine, his mentor, the man who had seen his potential and drawn him into this web of power, control, and ambition. It was hard to remember that there had ever been a time when he had trusted anyone more. But now, even Palpatine's voice seemed like a distant echo in his mind. The dark side of the Force was consuming him, and with it, his thoughts. "Very well," Anakin said flatly, turning to follow the officer down the long corridor. As he moved through the halls of the flagship, the ship's metallic hum was almost soothing, a reminder that he was a part of something now. This ship, this empire, it was his domain. It had to be. The walk to the command center was brief, and as they entered the large chamber, Anakin saw Palpatine standing before the holographic display, the glow of the projections lighting up his pale, calculating face. His presence was like a shadow in the room, his very being a reminder of the path Anakin had chosen. "Ah, Lord Vader," Palpatine said, his voice smooth and welcoming, though there was an edge of authority in it that made it impossible to mistake. "You've done well. The Republic is gone, and soon the Jedi will be nothing more than a memory." Anakin didn't respond at first. He simply nodded, his gaze flicking to the hologram in front of them. It was a map of the galaxy, marked with various Imperial objectives, regions of unrest, and new targets. The scale of the Empire's expansion was breathtaking.
"What's the next step?" Anakin asked, his voice now slightly more alert but still distant. The excitement of the initial victory had worn off, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. The galaxy would bend to him. "We will crush the last pockets of resistance," Palpatine replied, turning to face him fully. "The Separatists are no longer a concern, but the remnants of the Republic will continue to fight. We must be swift. We need to ensure that no threat to the Empire remains. The Jedi will be our last obstacle." Anakin's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Jedi. They were gone, yes, but there were whispers. Some Jedi had escaped, hidden themselves away in the deep corners of the galaxy, waiting for a chance to strike back. A small part of Anakin, the part that still clung to what was left of his humanity, felt uneasy at the thought. He had fought beside the Jedi. He had loved them, respected them. Obi-Wan had been a brother to him. But that part was shrinking now, swallowed by the darkness. "The Jedi will never rise again," Anakin said with finality, surprising even himself with the coldness of his words. Palpatine's eyes glimmered, his smile widening. "Good, that's what I want to hear. You're becoming who you were meant to be, Vader. You will crush them all. No mercy." Anakin's throat tightened at the mention of mercy. The words seemed foreign to him now, like a relic of another life. In his mind, he saw Padme again, her face so clear, so vivid. He could hear her voice in the back of his mind, whispering that it didn't have to be this way. But no, she had to understand. This was the only way. "Yes, Emperor," Anakin said softly, his gaze moving away from the hologram to the old man's face. He had to believe it. He needed to.
"We will begin with the remaining Jedi strongholds," Palpatine continued, his voice filled with the certainty of someone who had already won. "Once they are eradicated, the galaxy will belong to us, to you." Anakin took a deep breath. There it was again. Us. The Emperor's words felt like a chain, wrapping around his mind, pulling him deeper into his new identity. But for the first time since that fateful moment with Obi-Wan, Anakin allowed himself to imagine the future. He imagined a galaxy where he controlled everything, where he could protect Padme, where he could create peace in the universe, his universe. "I'm ready," Anakin said at last. The words felt hollow, but they were the only words he could say. He had made his choice. Palpatine gave him a long, scrutinizing look, as though he were assessing the depths of Anakin's resolve. Then he nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible gesture. "Good, then we shall begin. The Empire will rise, Lord Vader." Anakin nodded in return, the cold, mechanical certainty of the words settling over him like a shroud. He could feel the weight of it, the weight of his choices, his destiny. He had embraced the dark side, and now there was no turning back. The journey continued, as it always does, but for Anakin Skywalker, now Lord Vader, there was no more room for hesitation, no more for doubt. The galaxy was his to command. And with every step he took, the echoes of the man he had once been grew fainter and fainter.
The days following the Emperor's meeting were a blur of action, of planning, of new realities settling into place. Anakin, Lord Vader, had immersed himself fully in the Empire's operations, and the transition from a Jedi Knight to a Sith Lord felt both surreal and inevitable. The cold, calculated power that flowed through him now felt like an extension of his own being. His mind had become sharper, his senses more acute, but the isolation, it weighed heavily on him. He had not seen Padme since the rise of the Empire. The last time he had held her, it had been in secret, away from prying eyes. Her soft touch had always brought him peace, but now, with the galaxy at his fingertips and his heart swallowed by the darkness, he wondered if peace was even possible for him anymore. The ship hummed around him as he stood alone in his chamber, overlooking the galaxy. A galaxy that was now his to reshape. He was a force of destruction, yet he could not rid himself of the gnawing feeling that something was missing. He had accomplished everything he'd set out to do, and yet the feeling of emptiness clung to him like a shadow. His connection to the Force had never been stronger, but it was different now, darker. The whispers in his mind were not the same as before. They were no longer filled with the hope of saving those he loved. Now they were filled with visions of dominance, of crushing his enemies, of bending the galaxy to his will. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he commanded. The door slid open, revealing a familiar face, the officer from earlier. His gaze was respectful, though there was a hint of fear behind his eyes. The officers and soldiers who had once looked up to him as a Jedi now saw him as something else, something terrifying, something that belonged to the shadows. "Lord Vader," the officer began, his voice steady despite the obvious tension. "We have received reports from the Outer Rim. Several Jedi remnants are believed to be hiding on the planet Tatooine. The Emperor has ordered an immediate response." Anakin's mind immediately shifted gears. The Jedi, the ones who had escaped, who had managed to evade the wrath of the Empire. "Prepare the fleet," he said, his voice cold. "I'll personally lead the assault." The officer nodded and turned to leave, but Anakin's mind was already elsewhere, far beyond the walls of his quarters. The shadow of Padme lingered in his thoughts. He had made so many promises to her, promises that seemed more and more distant with each passing day. But there was no time for weakness. There was no room for distraction. He had a mission, and he would see it through to the end. Tatooine was quiet, too quiet. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren plains. Anakin stood at the front of the Imperial assault, his black armor gleaming under the fading light. His crimson lightsaber hummed softly in his grip, a weapon of destruction, just as it had been on Mustafar. The power within him felt so palpable, so real. He could feel the very air vibrating around him as the dark side of the Force twisted and pulsed in his veins. The Jedi who remained here had no idea what was coming. No one did. The troops around him were ready, trained, disciplined, unwavering. But it was Anakin who was the true weapon. He was the one who would bring an end to this rebellion. The last remnants of the old Republic would burn tonight. Lord Vader, one of the officers approached him, a sense of urgency in his voice. Scans show the Jedi are entrenched in the ruins nearby. It will be a difficult fight. Anakin turned his head slowly, his eyes piercing and unwavering. "Difficult for them," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the winds. He reached out with the Force, sensing the presence of the Jedi. There were only a handful of them, weak, scattered, but still they held on, clinging to the hope of survival, of resistance. That hope would be extinguished. As they neared the ruins, the Imperial forces spread out, forming a tight perimeter. The air was thick with tension, the anticipation palpable. Anakin's mind was focused, his senses sharp. He could feel the Jedi, faint but still there. They were hiding in the shadows, waiting for the inevitable. That hope would be extinguished.
And then, without warning, they struck. The Jedi were faster than Anakin had anticipated. A group of 3, 2 men and a woman, emerged from the shadows, their lightsabers igniting in a flurry of green and blue light. They were skilled, and they fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. But it didn't matter. Anakin was faster. The sound of clashing lightsabers filled the air as he moved with precision, his strikes brutal and quick. The Force flowed through him like a river, guiding his every move. The Jedi fought valiantly, but they were outmatched. They were weak, clinging to the ideals of the past, unwilling to accept the truth of the galaxy's new order. The battle was short, brutal, and one-sided. Within moments, the Jedi were on their knees, their lightsabers extinguished, their spirits broken. Anakin stood over them, his chest rising and falling with the effort of the fight, his eyes cold and distant. They were nothing to him, just obstacles to be crushed underfoot. The woman, her face stained with tears, looked up at him, her voice trembling. You were one of us. How could you?" Anakin's hand shot out, and with a wave of his fingers, the woman was silenced, her throat crushed by the Force. Her body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The 2 remaining Jedi looked on in horror, but they made no move to fight. They were broken. They had seen their end. "You should have surrendered," Anakin said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if speaking to himself. "There was no escaping this. The galaxy has already been decided." With a final, swift motion, he brought his lightsaber down, ending the lives of the last Jedi on Tatooine. The weight of the act didn't sit on him as it once would have. It felt necessary, right. He was doing what needed to be done. Palpatine's words echoed in his mind. The Jedi are the enemy. There can be no mercy. He extinguished his lightsaber, turning away from the bodies of the fallen Jedi. The battle was over, and the galaxy's fate was sealed. The Emperor would be pleased. But as he walked away, the same haunting thought lingered in the back of his mind. Was this really the way? No answer came, but the question remained. The days blurred into one another as Anakin, Lord Vader, continued his march across the galaxy, hunting down the last remnants of the Jedi Order. Each planet, each stronghold, fell beneath the weight of the Empire's unstoppable force. The galaxy trembled at his name, and the people who had once looked to the Jedi for hope now bowed before the Emperor's might. But in the silence of his quarters, far from the battlefield, something inside Anakin still stirred. His reflection in the black glass of his helmet seemed to haunt him. Sometimes, when he wasn't focused, when the noise of the Empire faded, he could feel it, the flicker of something familiar, something long buried under the darkness. Padme. Her face, her soft voice, it came to him in fragments, pieces of a life he had once loved, once believed in. Her memory seemed to flicker like a dying light, trying to push through the suffocating darkness of his mind. He had made the choice to save her, to create a galaxy where she could live without fear. And yet, as he stood alone, amidst his triumphs and victories, he realized with a quiet, painful truth. He had failed her.
The Empire was his, but the price was higher than he had ever anticipated. The Emperor's words still echoed in his mind. The Jedi were the enemy. There can be no mercy. The words were true, and yet there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind that told him they were not the whole truth. But there was no room for hesitation, no room for weakness. The force was stronger within him than it had ever been, its pull sharper, more intense, and all-consuming. Yet, despite the control it gave him, despite the power he wielded, a small part of him still rebelled against it. A tiny ember of the man he once was, still holding on, still struggling to find his way back. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. There was no going back, not now. The galaxy needed a leader, and he had been chosen for that role. Anakin's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door sliding open. It was the same officer as before, the one who had given him the initial reports on Tatooine. He stood in the doorway, looking both hesitant and urgent. "Lord Vader," the officer began, his voice tight with concern, "there is something you need to see. A report just came in from the Outer Rim. We've intercepted a transmission. It's from someone who claims to be in contact with the Jedi." Anakin turned to face him, his posture suddenly rigid. The officer hesitated, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Who?" Anakin asked, his voice cutting through the tension. He could feel the icy grip of the dark side tightening in his chest at the mention of the Jedi. His mind raced. Had there been another survivor? Another Jedi still lurking in the shadows? It's Master Kenobi. The name hit Anakin like a physical blow, reverberating through his soul. Obi-Wan. His brother. His friend. The man who had once believed in him. The man who had tried to stop him, tried to save him. He had once thought Obi-Wan dead, his body lost to the flames on Mustafar. But now, the thought of him alive, somewhere, out there in the galaxy, sent a shockwave through Anakin's heart. Could it be true? Could Obi-Wan have survived? Anakin clenched his fists, the sound of his armor echoing in the quiet room. His breath came faster as he processed the information. His mind surged with a mix of fury and confusion. Obi-Wan was alive, and he had hidden himself from the Empire. Why? What was his plan? Did he still believe he could save him? "We need to locate him immediately," Anakin said, his voice ice-cold. "Gather the fleet. We are going after him." The officer nodded and left, leaving Anakin standing there, his mind racing. A storm was brewing within him, a storm of old memories, of guilt,
of anger. But in that storm, there was something else, something deeper, a longing, a desire to find the man who had once been his friend, to confront him, to finally have the answers that he had long since stopped searching for. The Emperor would be pleased to hear of Obi-Wan's survival. He would see this as an opportunity to fully wipe away the last remnants of the Jedi, to finish what had been started. But Anakin didn't care about the Emperor's approval. This was personal. This was about him and Obi-Wan. And no matter how much the darkness clung to him, no matter how much it urged him to silence the past, he knew that this confrontation was inevitable. And it would come soon. The fleet arrived at the Outer Rim planet with surprising swiftness. Distant stars twinkled like forgotten memories in the black void of space. Anakin stood on the bridge of the flagship, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the holographic map of the planet. The transmission had come from a small, remote outpost, one that had been previously abandoned, now active once again. There was no mistaking it. This was where Obi-Wan had hidden. His eyes narrowed as he studied the coordinates. The air in the command center was thick with anticipation. The time had come to face the past, to confront the man who had once been his mentor.
But as they approached the planet, something inside Anakin stirred. It wasn't fear. No, he had no room for fear. It was something else, something softer. He pushed it down, burying it beneath layers of steel and anger. The moment the shuttle landed on the surface, Anakin wasted no time. The door to the shuttle opened, and the cold wind of the planet hit him. The terrain was barren, littered with the remains of old structures, half buried in dust. It was an eerie, desolate place, a fitting setting for the final confrontation. He could feel Obi-Wan's presence before he saw him. The Force tingled in his mind, a distant echo that was familiar, but somehow changed. Obi-Wan had embraced the shadows, just as Anakin had. But even now, Anakin knew that there was still a flicker of hope left within his old friend. It was that hope that Anakin had come to extinguish. Obi-Wan stood in the distance, his form silhouetted against the dying light of the planet's sun. He wore his Jedi robes still, though they were weathered and torn. His lightsaber hung at his side, a symbol of the past they had both left behind. For a moment, the two men stood there, separated by the distance of years, by the weight of their choices. Neither moved, neither spoke. And then, as the wind howled around them, Anakin took a step forward. "Obi-Wan!" he called out, his voice low but carrying across the barren expanse. Obi-Wan turned, his expression unreadable. "Anakin," he said quietly, almost mournfully. His voice had not changed, still filled with the same calmness, the same wisdom that Anakin had once admired. I had hoped you would come to your senses." Anakin's heart clenched, but he quickly suppressed the feeling. He could not allow himself to be swayed, not now. "There's no turning back, Obi-Wan," Anakin said, his voice cold, final. "I've made my choice." Obi-Wan's eyes softened, and for a moment it seemed as though he might say something else, something that could break through the armor Anakin had built around his soul. But he didn't. Instead, he ignited his lightsaber, the green blade humming to life. "I know," Obi-Wan replied, "and so have I." The two men stood in silence for one final moment, the weight of their past hanging between them. And then the battle began. The duel that followed was not just a clash of lightsabers. It was the culmination of everything Anakin had become, everything he had abandoned, and everything he once believed in. Every swing of his crimson blade was a strike against the man he had once called his brother. Every move he made was imbued with the raw power of the dark side,
a power that twisted and warped his every thought. But even as his lightsaber collided with Obi-Wan's green blade, there was a part of him, no matter how deeply buried, that could still hear the echoes of their old friendship, could still feel the bond they once shared. Obi-Wan moved gracefully, his strikes precise and fluid. The Jedi Master had not lost his skill, nor had he forgotten the lessons he had taught Anakin all those years ago. Yet there was something different in the way Obi-Wan fought now. He fought with a sorrow in his heart, a sorrow that matched the weight in Anakin's soul. The longer they fought, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a battle of lightsabers. It was a battle for their souls. Anakin's anger surged as he pressed forward. The Emperor had promised him everything: the power to protect those he loved, the galaxy under his control. But every time his blade met Obi-Wan's, a flicker of doubt passed through his mind. The dark side whispered that Obi-Wan was the enemy, that he was the last obstacle to Anakin's true power. But beneath that whisper was another voice, one Anakin couldn't silence. Was this really the path?
But the battle raged on, too loud, too furious for Anakin to hear anything else. Obi-Wan parried another of Anakin's strikes, and they both leaped back, briefly catching their breath. The wind howled between them, a constant reminder of how far they had fallen from their former selves. "You've become a shadow of the man you were, Anakin," Obi-Wan said, his voice calm, though tinged with sorrow. "This path you've chosen, it's not the answer. You don't have to do this." Anakin's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "I've made my choice, Obi-Wan. The Jedi are no more. The galaxy is mine to reshape, and I will not allow you to stand in my way." Obi-Wan shook his head, his expression one of deep sadness. "You don't understand. This is not what we fought for. We fought for peace, for justice, for the Republic." "The Republic is dead," Anakin snapped. "The galaxy has changed. I've changed." With a surge of power, Anakin lunged forward, pressing the attack. His blade flashed through the air, driven by pure hatred. But Obi-Wan was quick, his own blade moving in a steady defensive rhythm. The ground beneath them cracked with every strike, the force crackling in the air like static. The sound of their lightsabers clashing was a violent symphony, echoing across the barren world, a reflection of the battle within Anakin's own heart. "You always were the better fighter," Obi-Wan said, as he parried another strike. "But you've lost your way. You've let the darkness consume you." "I've gained everything I wanted," Anakin growled, his voice heavy with conviction. "I have the power to save those I love now. I can protect Padme. I can protect the galaxy." A brief flash of recognition crossed Obi-Wan's face, and for a moment he hesitated. "Padme is gone, Anakin. You killed her. You were too late. And in doing so, you've lost everything. No matter how much power you gain, no matter how many worlds you conquer, you will never find peace with yourself." The words hit Anakin like a physical blow. He froze for a moment, just a moment, but it was enough for Obi-Wan to strike. The green blade sliced through the air, narrowly grazing Anakin's arm. The sting of the wound was sharp, but the pain it brought was nothing compared to the pain that had been building inside him. "Padme," Anakin muttered under his breath, the name slipping out like a prayer. Obi-Wan, sensing the flicker of vulnerability, stepped back, his face softening with regret. "Anakin, this path you're on, this darkness you've embraced, it will never bring her back. You've sacrificed everything you ever loved. You don't have to go down this road." Anakin's eyes glinted with anger, but beneath that,
The pain was still there. "You don't understand. You never did. You never saw what I was trying to do, what I was trying to save." "I did understand," Obi-Wan replied, his voice firm but kind. "I understood better than you think. I saw the danger, Anakin. I saw what you were becoming, and I tried to stop it. But you wouldn't listen." The words hit harder than any strike could. Anakin's heart twisted in his chest. The realization of what he had done, what he had become, threatened to crush him. But the darkness pushed those feelings aside, forcing him to focus, to keep fighting. "I couldn't let her die," Anakin spat. "I couldn't lose her like I lost my mother." Obi-Wan stepped forward, his own weapon still held defensively. "Anakin, you weren't meant to save everyone. You can't control the future, and you can't change the past. But you can still choose to turn back. It's not too late." Anakin's breath quickened, the internal conflict threatening to swallow him whole. But he was far past the point of redemption. His mind was made up. He had to be the one to finish this, to end it once and for all. If there was no turning back, then there was nothing left to lose. "You're wrong," Anakin hissed, his voice venomous. "You always were." With a scream of fury, he raised his lightsaber and charged once more.
The two warriors stood in the stillness of the wind-blown planet, their breaths heavy, their bodies battered from the intensity of their duel. Anakin's heart raced, the heat of his anger and the searing pain from the wound in his side mixing in a whirlpool of emotions. His world, once so clear and driven by purpose, now felt like a twisted maze, each step forward bringing him deeper into darkness. His eyes, though hidden behind the mask, stared coldly at Obi-Wan, who stood in front of him, unwavering. The Jedi Master did not look victorious. There was no sense of triumph in his expression, only sorrow. A sorrow that mirrored the deep ache inside Anakin. "You're still my brother, Anakin," Obi-Wan said, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried through the air like a plea. "I never stopped believing in you, even after all this time. But this darkness you've embraced, it's not you. You're not a monster." Anakin's hand trembled on his lightsaber. The crimson blade pulsed in his grip, its energy steady and harsh, a constant reminder of what he had become. His heart ached, but the darkness, that cold, commanding presence, still wrapped itself around him like a vice. "No weakness," it whispered. "No mercy. There is only power." "Your words are hollow, Obi-Wan," Anakin spat, his voice full of bitterness. "You think you can still reach me? You think I care about redemption? I've made my choice. I don't need your pity." Obi-Wan's face softened even more, but his voice was firm. "This isn't pity, Anakin. It's hope. There is always hope, even now." Anakin's breath came in short, ragged gasps, and for a moment the world around him seemed to blur. The anger, the pain, it was all still there, but now, beneath it, was something else. A flicker of light. It was like a distant star that he had long since forgotten existed, but now it was just within reach. He could feel it. Padme.
Her face appeared in his mind again, soft and serene, smiling at him with love. He could almost hear her voice, calling to him, "Anakin, you're still in there. Come back to me." His breath caught, and for the briefest of moments, he felt the chains of the dark side loosen. But just as quickly, they tightened again, pulling him back into the cold void. "Enough," Anakin said, his voice cracking. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the conflict within him reaching a boiling point. "I don't have time for your ideals, Obi-Wan. I'm done listening to you." Without warning, Anakin lunged at Obi-Wan, his lightsaber flashing in a deadly arc. Obi-Wan parried the blow with ease, his eyes never leaving Anakin's face. But this time, there was something different in the air. Obi-Wan could sense it, the hesitation, the doubt. The walls Anakin had built around himself were crumbling, even if just a little. Their duel raged on, each strike a testament to their power, but also to their history. The memory of their training together, of the battles they had fought side by side, echoed in every motion. And yet, now, they were enemies. Brothers who had become strangers, their connection torn apart by the very force that had once bound them together. Anakin's mind raced, caught between his desire for power, his need to protect, and the lingering vestiges of his former self, his love for Padme, his fear of loss, and the betrayal he felt when the Jedi had turned against him. "I did it for you," Anakin snarled, his voice filled with fury. "I did it for all of you. You don't understand what I had to sacrifice. I could have saved her. I could have saved all of us, but you couldn't see it. You stood in my way. You turned your back on me." Obi-Wan's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable sadness in it. "I never turned my back on you, Anakin. You did this to yourself. The darkness you embraced is your own choice. You didn't need to sacrifice your soul to save anyone." Anakin's vision swam, his grip tightening on his saber as a fresh wave of pain coursed through his body. His wound burned, and for a moment the searing heat of it overwhelmed his thoughts. His eyes flickered as he remembered the very thing that had started it all, the reason for his fall. The pain of losing Padme, the desperation to stop her death, the lie he had believed, that the dark side could offer him the power to change the future. And then he saw it again, the memory of her last words, the fading sound of her voice as she slipped away from him. "Anakin." Ugh. The memory hit him like a storm, crashing through his defenses. His breath caught, and for a brief moment, the walls he had built around his heart faltered. It was a brief moment, but in that moment, something broke inside him. Obi-Wan could see it, the flicker of humanity still lingering within Anakin. He could sense the conflict in the Force, the battle between the man who had once been his friend and the monster he had become.
"You're still in there, Anakin," Obi-Wan said softly, his eyes searching Anakin's face for any sign of recognition. "You don't have to go any further down this path. You can still come back. There's still time." Anakin's chest tightened. His breath was shallow, and the grip on his saber weakened slightly. He raised his head, his eyes meeting Obi-Wan's for a fleeting second. In that instant, the man who had been Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Knight, was still there, hidden deep within the darkness. But before he could respond, the dark side surged through him, flooding his mind with anger, fear, and pain. The moment of clarity was gone, replaced by the overwhelming force of rage. "No!" Anakin shouted, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "I won't go back. I've made my choice." With that, he charged again, his lightsaber a flash of red fury. Obi-Wan braced himself, his own saber steady and calm, waiting for the final confrontation. Anakin's strikes were fast, fueled by his anger, but there was an unspoken desperation in them now. He was fighting for something more than just power. He was fighting to prove something to himself, to bury the doubt, to silence the voice in his mind that whispered that it was not too late. Their blades collided in a flash of sparks, the sound of the clash echoing through the desolate planet. They were both growing tired, but neither could afford to stop. Neither could afford to show weakness.
But as they continued to fight, something shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. Obi-Wan's movements became more fluid, more sure. He no longer fought with sorrow. He fought with purpose. He fought to end this, to bring his brother back. Anakin, on the other hand, fought as if he had nothing left to lose. The dark side whispered louder, urging him on, telling him that this was his destiny. This was the only way. And so, with one final desperate strike, Anakin swung his saber. Obi-Wan parried the blow, and in that moment he reached out, not with his hands, but with the Force. He touched Anakin's mind, gently, as if reaching for a lost part of him. And just for a moment, their minds touched. Obi-Wan felt it, Anakin's heart, torn and broken, a galaxy of pain behind his eyes. But it was too late. The darkness had taken root too deeply. Obi-Wan's hand faltered, his heart heavy with grief, but he knew what had to be done. With a swift, powerful movement, he pushed Anakin back, his blade flashing in the air as it found its mark. Anakin's breath stopped in his throat as the pain hit. His body collapsed to the ground, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. For a brief moment, there was silence, complete and total silence. Then, in that silence, Anakin heard her voice once more. Anakin. It was the last thing he heard before the darkness took him. Obi-Wan stood there, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. His lightsaber still glowed in his hand, but there was no victory in his eyes. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, Anakin Skywalker, the man who had been, the man who could have been, was left to face the choices he had made, standing on the precipice of his own destruction. The two warriors stood in the stillness of the wind-blown planet, their breaths heavy, their bodies battered from the intensity of their duel. Anakin's heart raced, the heat of his anger and the searing pain from the wound in his side mixing in a whirlpool of emotions. His world, once so clear and driven by purpose, now felt like a twisted maze, each step forward bringing him deeper into darkness. His eyes, though hidden behind the mask, stared coldly at Obi-Wan, who stood in front of him unwavering. The Jedi Master did not look victorious. There was no sense of triumph in his expression, only sorrow, a sorrow that mirrored the deep ache inside Anakin. "You're still my brother, Anakin," Obi-Wan said, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried through the air like a plea. "I never stopped believing in you, even after all this time. But this darkness you've embraced, it's not you. You're not a monster." Anakin's hand trembled on his lightsaber. The crimson blade pulsed in his grip, its energy steady and harsh, a constant reminder of what he had become. His heart ached, but the darkness, that cold, commanding presence, still wrapped itself around him like a vice. "No weakness," it whispered. "No mercy. There is only power." "Your words are hollow, Obi-Wan," Anakin spat, his voice full of bitterness. "You think you can still reach me? You think I care about redemption? I've made my choice. I don't need your pity." Obi-Wan's face softened even more, but his voice was firm. "This isn't pity, Anakin. It's hope. There is always hope, even now." Anakin's breath came in short, ragged gasps, and for a moment the world around him seemed to blur. The anger, the pain, it was all still there, but now, beneath it, was something else. A flicker of light. It was like a distant star that he had long since forgotten existed, but now it was just within reach. He could feel it. Padme. Her face appeared in his mind again, soft and serene, smiling at him with love. He could almost hear her voice calling to him. "Anakin, you're still in there. Come back to me." His breath caught,
and for the briefest of moments he felt the chains of the dark side loosen. But just as quickly, they tightened again, pulling him back into the cold void. "Enough," Anakin said, his voice cracking. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the conflict within him reaching a boiling point. "I don't have time for your ideals, Obi-Wan. I'm done listening to you." Without warning, Anakin lunged at Obi-Wan, his lightsaber flashing in a deadly arc. Obi-Wan parried the blow with ease, his eyes never leaving Anakin's face. But this time, there was something different in the air. Obi-Wan could sense it, the hesitation, the doubt. The walls Anakin had built around himself were crumbling, even if just a little. Their duel raged on, each strike a testament to their power, but also to their history. The memory of their training together, of the battles they had fought side by side, echoed in every motion. And yet now they were enemies. Brothers who had become strangers, their connection torn apart by the very force that had once bound them together. Anakin's mind raced, caught between his desire for power, his need to protect, and the lingering vestiges of his former self. His love for Padme, his fear of loss, and the betrayal he felt when the Jedi had turned against him. "I did it for you," Anakin snarled, his voice filled with fury. "I did it for all of you. You don't understand what I had to sacrifice. I could have saved her. I could have saved all of us, but you couldn't see it. You stood in my way. You turned your back on me." Obi-Wan's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable sadness in it. "I never turned my back on you, Anakin. You did this to yourself. The darkness you embraced is your own choice. You didn't need to sacrifice your soul to save anyone." Anakin's vision swam, his grip tightening on his saber as a fresh wave of pain coursed through his body. His wound burned, and for a moment the searing heat of it overwhelmed his thoughts. His eyes flickered as he remembered the very thing that had started it all, the reason for his fall. The pain of losing Padme, the desperation to stop her death, the lie he had believed that the dark side could offer him the power to change the future. And then he saw it again, the memory of her last words, the fading sound of her voice as she slipped away from him, leaving him alone. Anakin. The memory hit him like a storm, crashing through his defenses. His breath caught, and for a brief moment the walls he had built around his heart faltered. It was a brief moment, but in that moment, something broke inside him. Obi-Wan could see it, the flicker of humanity still lingering within Anakin. He could sense the conflict in the Force, the battle between the man who had once been his friend and the monster he had become. "You're still in there, Anakin," Obi-Wan said softly, his eyes searching Anakin's face for any sign of recognition. "You don't have to go any further down this path. You can still come back. There's still time." Anakin's chest tightened. His breath was shallow, and the grip on his saber weakened slightly. He raised his head, his eyes meeting Obi-Wan's for a fleeting second. In that instant, the man who had been Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Knight, was still there, hidden deep within the darkness. But before he could respond, the dark side surged through him, flooding his mind with anger, fear, and pain. The moment of clarity was gone, replaced by the overwhelming force of rage. "No!" Anakin shouted, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "I won't go back. I've made my choice." With that, he charged again, his lightsaber a flash of red fury. Obi-Wan braced himself, his own saber steady and calm, waiting for the final confrontation. Anakin's strikes were fast, fueled by his anger, but there was an unspoken desperation in them now. He was fighting for something, something more than just power. He was fighting to prove something to himself, to bury the doubt, to silence the voice in his mind that whispered that it was not too late. Their blades collided in a flash of sparks, the sound of the clash echoing through the desolate planet. They were both growing tired, but neither could afford to stop. Neither could afford to show weakness. But as they continued to fight, something shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. Obi-Wan's movements became more fluid, more sure. He no longer fought with sorrow. He fought with purpose. He fought to end this, to bring his brother back. Anakin, on the other hand, fought as if he had nothing left to lose. The dark side whispered louder, urging him on, telling him that this was his destiny. This was the only way. And so, with one final, desperate strike, Anakin swung his saber. Obi-Wan parried the blow, and in that moment he reached out, not with his hands, but with the Force. He touched Anakin's mind, gently, as if reaching for a lost part of him. And just for a moment their minds touched. Obi-Wan felt it. Anakin's heart, torn and broken, a galaxy of pain behind his eyes. But it was too late. The darkness had taken root too deeply. Obi-Wan's hand faltered, his heart heavy with grief, but he knew what had to be done. With a swift, powerful movement, he pushed Anakin back, his blade flashing in the air as it found its mark. Anakin's breath stopped in his throat as the pain hit. His body collapsed to the ground, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. For a brief moment, there was silence, complete and total silence. Then, in that silence, Anakin heard her voice once more. Anakin. It was the last thing he heard before the darkness took him. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. It settled over Mustafar like a heavy blanket. Anakin Skywalker, once the shining hope of the Jedi Order, lay defeated. His body sprawled out on the jagged rocks beneath him. His lightsaber, the crimson blade still flickering with the remnants of battle, was now dark, its energy spent. Obi-Wan stood over him, his own saber extinguished, his heart heavy with the weight of what had transpired. His chest heaved, and there was an emptiness in his eyes, an emptiness that spoke of years of friendship, betrayal, and loss. His mind tried to comprehend what had just happened, but it was too much to understand, too much to carry.
For years, Obi-Wan had tried to reach Anakin, tried to pull him back from the edge. They had trained together, fought together, laughed together. Anakin had been his brother, and now, in this moment, he was lost to the darkness. Obi-Wan could feel the finality of it. Anakin's fall was not just the fall of a Jedi, but the fall of a man he had once loved like a brother. The grief was overwhelming, but there was no time for mourning. Not yet. The galaxy had to be saved, and there was still work to be done. Padme, she had to be warned. But even as Obi-Wan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next, the wind carried something faint, something familiar. He looked up, blinking through the haze of smoke and heat, and saw a shadow approaching. A ship, descending through the acrid sky, its engines humming low. The ship landed with a soft thud, and a figure emerged from its hatch. Padme Amidala. Her face was pale, her eyes red from the strain of what she must have sensed had happened. Her gaze locked with Obi-Wan's, and the silence between them was deafening. Neither of them had to say a word. They both knew. They had both seen what Anakin had become. They had both watched as the man they loved fell into the dark. Padme's feet moved slowly toward him, each step heavy with the weight of the galaxy's collapse. She stopped a few paces away, looking down at Anakin's still body. Her face was filled with sorrow, grief, yes, but there was something else too, acceptance. The broken pieces of her heart were too raw, too fresh to deny. "Is it over?" Padme asked softly, her voice quiet but firm. Obi-Wan swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "It's over." The words felt like a burden, as though they could never be spoken lightly, never be said without consequence. Padmé's eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were full of pain. She had loved him, she had believed in him, but love alone could not save him from the darkness he had embraced. Did he? Padmé's voice faltered, but she gathered herself, her gaze meeting Obi-Wan's. Did he die fighting? Did he die as the man I knew? Obi-Wan's throat tightened. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell her that Anakin had found peace, that he had come back to the light. But the truth was far darker, more painful. "No, Padmé," Obi-Wan said softly. "He fought until the very end, but not for the man you knew. He died as Darth Vader." Padmé's expression was one of quiet sorrow. She didn't cry, but Obi-Wan could see the tears behind her eyes, just waiting to be released. She had already lost so much. First, her hope for the Republic, then her love, and now, Anakin. "It was always the dark side," Obi-Wan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It consumed him, bit by bit. It took everything. It took the man you loved."
Padmé stood still, her eyes distant, as if she were looking beyond the scene before her, past the ruins of Mustafar, past Anakin's fallen body, past everything that had been destroyed. Obi-Wan's own thoughts were a swirl of grief, guilt, and disbelief. His heart ached for Padmé, for the life they had lost, but there was also a sense of responsibility, something that pulled him forward. The fight was not over. The Empire was just beginning to rise, and there were others who still believed in hope. "We can't let him die in vain," Obi-Wan said, his voice steady now, his resolve growing. "There's more to do. The galaxy still needs us." Padmé looked at him, her expression torn but resolute. "And what do we do now, after everything?" Obi-Wan met her gaze, and for a long moment there was silence between them. The wind howled in the distance, the sky still burned with the aftermath of their battle. But in this brief pause there was something else, something deeper, a promise, a hope that would live on despite the darkness that had taken root. "We rebuild," Obi-Wan said simply. "We rebuild and we fight for a better future. We fight for those who still believe in the light." Padmé nodded slowly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She knew the road ahead would be long, filled with uncertainty and loss, but she also knew that it was a road that could lead to something better. Not for herself, perhaps, not for Anakin, but for the galaxy, for the generations to come. "We will," she whispered, her voice carrying a quiet determination. Together, they turned their backs on the wasteland of Mustafar, leaving behind the memories of a fallen Jedi and the hope of a future yet to be written. The stars above them were bright, but they were cold, distant. It was a reminder that hope, like the stars, could be found even in the darkest places. And so they walked away, side by side, their journey far from over, the legacy of Anakin Skywalker now a painful memory, but one that would forever echo in the Force. The night had fallen, and with it the first whispers of peace. The winds calmed, the fires of Mustafar's rage died down, and the stars above began to shine just a little brighter. Obi-Wan and Padmé walked away from the battlefield, their steps slow but sure, as if the weight of the galaxy had lightened ever so slightly. There was still so much to do, so much to fix. But in that quiet moment there was something else too, a small, quiet seed of hope. Perhaps it was a hope that one day the galaxy could find its way again. Perhaps it was a hope that even in the face of such terrible loss, there would always be something worth fighting for. As they disappeared into the distance, the soft hum of the galaxy's heartbeat echoed through the stillness. It was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, something unknown. And so, in the cool embrace of the night, Obi-Wan and Padmé knew this. They were not alone. the fight for the light had just begun.